How could I not be so nervous about being back in a classroom?
Computer classes are totally different. We need to make sure that you are getting the skill before we can keep moving.
Hello, welcome back to Miss Melodie's Training Tips. Today we're going to be answering the question about being nervous of being back in a classroom. How can I not be so nervous about being back in a classroom, a traditional school? It may have been years since you've been back into a classroom. You've never had an experience of a classroom with other adults. It may have been the last time that you were in school was with other children, or high school, or even college. Being back in a classroom as a working adult or in your working years can be different, so to speak. And so we have a student of ours who wrote about our instructor, Miss Melodie, saying, "I appreciate the way she tailors our lessons to what is present for some of us in our current roles." So really being identified as working adults, people who have careers that they're looking to achieve, people who are transitioning careers. Miss Melodie, you are paying attention. You are in the classroom on the front lines with our students, and you know what it's like to have nervous students in the classroom. And so I want to ask the question to you, and hopefully you have a answer for our listening audience of, how could I not be so nervous about being back in a classroom?
The first thing that you need to recognize is you're not the only one going through this experience. And so when you realize that other people are struggling with the same things you are, it becomes a little bit less intimidating because you know that you guys can learn together. As you come into a classroom and you're nervous about whether or not you can do this, just being open to, we go step by step through everything. So I check with all my students before I move on to my next activity. So that's where engagement is so important. As long as you are actually on point with me and you're following along, I make sure that I don't leave you behind. And so you may not know anything coming in, but I'm going to watch and make sure that I don't leave you behind as you go along, so that computers are very much like math, in that you have to understand the basics, and they build. It's a building block system. And if you don't understand the basics, it's really hard to do some of the later stuff. So all of our instructors are that way. We do it in different ways, where we're going to keep an eye on you and make sure that we don't leave you behind. So it is a classroom environment that you may not have been used to before, but unlike the traditional school where you went before, in a classroom of 30 students, the teacher was presenting material that she's covering so much material during a time. You take a test, whether I get an A or a C or even an F, the teacher keeps moving. Computer classes are totally different. We need to make sure that you are getting the skill before we can keep moving. So they're a different type of classroom environment than what most of our students are used to.
Yeah, computer classes are very different than traditional classes. And I think if you are nervous about being in a career development class, such as even project management or Excel, Word, everything along the spectrum of what we offer, the feeling about being in our classroom is a lot different than being in a traditional classroom, like you said. So it sounds like that you don't move on until the skill is kind of understood by everybody, at least, and where everybody's coming from and what they need. How can somebody interact in a classroom when they're nervous? What ways or what things would you recommend somebody do if they were to be nervous? I mean, you can't just stand up and start saying hi to everybody, or interrupt and start a 30-minute dialogue with you during the middle of class. What are some, small tips that you would give somebody who's nervous in class about kind of interacting with other people?
And again, we have the challenge too of online. As you said, you can't really even talk to other people. And And especially if you are an adult who is used to more traditional classroom learning, it's not just the idea of going back to school, but you're going back to school in a totally new environment too. And so one of the things that I would say first, and I hear this from some students, they're like, I cannot learn this way. And first off, I'm sure you've had teachers or parents or people in your life say, try to be really careful with the word cannot. I remember when I first started teaching online that I thought it would be, it was a totally new environment for me too. But from a teacher standpoint, you as a student need to know that actually I'm more efficient as an online instructor than when I would be physically in the classroom with you. And I was a very involved classroom instructor. I was on my feet the entire time, moving around the room, looking at people's screens, making sure they were in the right place. But it's a physical impossibility for me to be in the upper left-hand side of the room and in the back of the room at the same time. However, when I teach online, I literally can see everybody's screen. I can see your screen, and it is much more efficient than when I had to walk over to you and take a look at your screen. So I can catch whether you're falling behind quicker now that I'm teaching online than I could if you were in the classroom. Which is, people are kind of surprised about that.
Uh-huh.
But the other thing too is that there's a lot more engagement. Again, I'm kind of baffled myself, but there's more engagement in my online classes than when I taught in the classroom, even though I did keep everyone involved, because I cannot see you. And so the only way that I know you're with me is I have to ask frequent, very, very frequent questions as, are you with me? And
Mhm.
if you're not with me, I'm going to check on you. Now we see teeny tiny, like 1-inch screens, but I
Oh,
can click on your screen and see a full screen, and I can see exactly where you are and where you're stuck and what you're doing. And so even just telling the instructor, like if you're brand new and you're worried about getting lost real quickly, you can ask. One of our instructors uses a concept called focus groups, where she picks like 3 or 4 students that she really carefully monitors their screens. And you can tell her that, hey, I need to be in your focus group every day. I actually kind of, my classes are small enough, everybody's in my focus group, unless I realize that I really don't need to keep you in my focus group. But even if you're not in my focus group, I'm watching for those response buttons to know that you're okay. Because I don't want to leave you behind because things
yeah.
build one to the next.
So it's
So
okay to be honest when you're not, interacting on the screen, because the instructor is going to be watching and there for you and be able to jump back in. I wonder how much does a chat feature play into how us interact during the classroom?
well, again, that's a totally different way of learning than we have ever learned before. And it's almost like you're having to learn a new learning style. There's multiple ways of letting an instructor know that maybe you just missed a step as far as the direction. So when I have classes that are together for like our cohorts where they're together for a long period of time, everyone processes information differently. So I give my students access to their mics so that they can ask me verbal questions. There is the ability to raise your hand, just like you could raise your hand in a regular class. And if you're lost or you need something clarified, you can raise your hand and verbally ask it. The chat is an opportunity to sometimes ask a question while you're thinking about it without necessarily interrupting the instructor. And so the neat thing is my classes, if I'm talking or explaining something, I do see the questions come through in the chat, but I usually have to finish my thought process and then go address the question.
Yeah.
Sometimes my other students will answer the questions before I do, and that actually makes the classroom run more efficiently, because it's just like, hey, what file did she say we were on? And I'm not the only one who can answer that question.
That's
So,
great. I mean, in traditional classes, you may have been reprimanded for trying to whisper to somebody across the classroom, "Hey, what did she just say?" And the teacher comes in, "You can't be doing that." And it's actually encouraged
mhm.
to group participate to make sure that your whole squad kind of moves forward. I want to hold off on worrying about holding the whole class up, because I feel like that's going to be a whole episode in and of itself. So next episode, let's talk about, being worried about holding the rest of the class up. Thank you, Miss Melodie. If anybody is interested in career development training, you can go to careerdevelopmentsolutions.com.